11:15 p.m. on August 25, 2025, a low-cost Ukrainian drone skimmed the treetops outside Bojot Kovo. Its warhead, just 2 pounds. Its target, a $3 billion Russian pipeline that carried nearly a third of Moscow's fuel. Russia's radar operators thought they had the skies locked down. By dawn, they'd learn how wrong that was. Stay with me. We'll unravel how the strike unfolded hour by hour and why billion-dollar defenses lost to drones costing a fraction of the price. The tactic Ukraine used here was called a double strike, or what some officers later described as a false sky. The idea was simple: make the night so crowded with threats that the real assets slipped through unnoticed. That began when the first wave of Mugan 5 drones eased into Russian airspace. 15 of them, cheap and expendable, moved as a loose swarm toward the Ryazan Refinery. Each Mugan 5 cost around $500, designed to be used once and sacrificed. Alongside them flew heavier Liot drones, built with a louder radar profile to look like something with real punch. Together, on screens, they resembled a proper strike package. Operators at the Russian command consoles assumed they had detected the core of a Ukrainian attack. In the bunker, those assumptions triggered a full mobilization. Electronic warfare crews powered up a high-end Russian system, the Krasuka 4EW jammer, blanketing channels with interference. Gun crews swung their optics toward the signatures. Surface-to-air units activated automated batteries, filling monitors with tracking arcs and engagement windows. At first glance, it looked disciplined, methodical, under control. Every signal on the scopes drew fire. Every drone that blinked onto the grid became a designated kill. This was the purpose of the saturation wave. The Mugan 5s were never meant to survive the night. Their role was to overload the human and electronic picture. Like tossing fragments of metal into the wind, each reflection forced missiles, tracers, or pulses of jamming to respond. Russian defenders weren't facing one real strike. They were facing a wall of noise. Time disappeared. Ammunition stockpiles thinned. The sense of certainty inside the control room hardened even further. On the screens, the results seemed clear. Operators watched drones vanish one by one in bursts of light. Communications filled with confirmation reports. Intercepts logged. Coordinates scrubbed from the maps. Skies apparently cleared. Anti-air batteries painted arcs of tracer fire. Radar returns dropped away. The Krasuka 4 system drowned anything that tried to push through. To the men watching, it looked like a flawless defense. But the Ryazan Refinery was never the objective. It was bait, chosen precisely because the site mattered enough to draw full attention. The expendable waves performed exactly as designed. They died loudly, creating the appearance of a decisive Ukrainian push and a decisive Russian response. Every missile allocated to those formations, every sensor locked onto their signatures, was one less line of defense aimed at the true axis of approach. While the bunker celebrated, the real passage lay unmonitored. Low ground and fog shielded the corridor. With jammers and sensors orienting upward toward visible threats, no one scanned that shadowed approach. Defensive concentration had been bent in the wrong direction. What Russia fought was a staged performance rather than the main event. And it worked almost perfectly. Officers congratulated each other, convinced the refinery had been secured and that no Ukrainian craft remained in the sector. Screens looked clean. Noise levels fell back. Commanders believed the battle for that sector closed. But even in that quiet, not everyone was convinced. One officer noticed something that didn't match the expected pattern. He wasn't ready to call the night finished. He ordered a different kind of sweep, and that change would decide the night. Most of the crews eased back, believing the night's battle was settled. Screens showed nothing but clean air and relief spread across the bunker. But while others let their guard down, one commander stayed sharp. He kept staring at the display as if silence itself held an answer. This was his break from the room's mood. Officers were already consigning the strike to the after-action logs. To them, it was simple. Decoys down, refinery safe, mission complete. Yet the commander felt the rhythm was wrong. The attack felt designed to be obvious. Exactly the sort of noise that hides a quieter move. He knew Ukraine had shown too much precision in past operations to waste a swarm this way. When he spoke, the atmosphere shifted. He offered just 2 words to the room. Too loud, you can imagine the effect. Victory chatter stopped. He pressed further, explaining that a strike so messy had to be cover for something sharper, something moving under the fog while everyone looked elsewhere. Drone warfare wasn't only about speed. It was built on misdirection. He recognized the tactic. Instead of signing off, he issued a new order. Run another check. Not the usual radar sweep, a different tool. His call launched a small Orlan 10 reconnaissance drone, fitted with a thermal camera. Unlike the surface-to-air systems built for big signatures, this little aircraft searched quietly and close to the ground. Its job was simple: spot what the radars had missed. Crews reset their posture. The room that had been leaning back now leaned in. Minutes later, the Orlan 10 was in the air, working its low-altitude profile. Operating below about 200 feet, it skimmed a path along valleys and fog belts near Bojot Kovo, an approach that nobody had prioritized before. To most officers, it was just dead space. To this commander, it was the only space that made sense. The drone's thermal optics began drawing outlines. On the feed, the forest showed its patterns: cold soil, faint heat from vegetation, a backdrop of fog. Against that, anomalies emerged. Small bursts of signature. Not clear yet, but irregular enough to stand out. They weren't the flamboyant streaks of high engines or flares. They were subtler, like something pressing itself low, pushing heat softly into the air. This crack in the picture changed the mood again. Suddenly, what had seemed like absolute victory looked more like unfinished business. The crew who had celebrated minutes earlier now followed the recon feed frame by frame. The suspicion was being confirmed in real time. This was not a clean sweep. There was still a weapon out there, shielded by gaps in the defense net. The psychological pressure shifted instantly. Numbers said the skies were clear. His instinct said the fight wasn't done. And often in war, instinct weighs heavier than data. The quiet doubt of one commander had redirected the entire bunker, forcing eyes into the corner of the map no one had checked. Minutes later, the Orlan 10 lifted off. What it found would change the battle. They called it the fiber-optic ghost, a drone that spoke only by wire. No radio, no signal for jammers to interfere with, just a glass fiber thinner than a finger linking it to a hidden control truck. That line stretched on the order of a dozen miles, unreeling behind the craft as it slipped through the fog. For Russian operators hunting for transmissions in the spectrum, the sky looked silent. But silence wasn't safety. It meant an intruder was already inside. Inside the truck, the pilot's monitor showed a crisp, uninterrupted feed. No static, no glitches, even through heavy haze. The wire carried full-resolution imagery as if the pilot were seeing the terrain with their own eyes. That was the point. A fiber-optic tether cannot be jammed. While Russian electronic warfare crews burned power into the air, flooding channels with interference, the ghost stayed untouched. For the defenders, it was like shouting into the wind. That clarity gave Ukraine a sharp edge. Operators could bank low around ridges, hug tree lines, and contour the land without hesitation. Every adjustment was precise. On Russian screens, though, the counters looked perfect. Decoys destroyed, refinery safe, no new contacts emerging. Crews reported skies clear, yet what threatened them moved invisibly under the fog. The drone crept forward, weaving through valleys where radar beams bent away. It used terrain masking, an old tactic but effective. While defenders swept higher altitudes, the lowest approaches stayed masked. That bought minutes. But above, the Orlan 10 reconnaissance drone now circled, scanning with infrared. Each pass increased the chance of exposure. The pilot pressed forward carefully, aware one mistake would give away the corridor. Then came the near kill. A Panzer S-1 crew, frustrated by empty scopes, fired on what they thought was a stray target. The missile dived low. For a split second, the drone seemed finished. It streaked past within meters, tearing the air around it. The pilot threw the craft into a desperate roll. A Panzer S-1 missile grazed the drone. The evasive turn snapped the glass fiber. The dead cable left a visible trail back to the truck. The lifeline was gone. The drone stayed aloft, but its greatest shield, immunity to jamming, was now reversed. The broken fiber recoiled onto the ground, catching on branches and glowing faintly under night optics. Russian search teams tracked it like a breadcrumb, reading its curve back through the mist. What had been invisible was now mapped by physics alone. Inside the truck, the operators knew instantly. Calm control evaporated. The crew broke cover, starting the engine, shifting into an emergency move before the net closed. That single weakness had undone the system's perfection. You can see the trade-off here. Fiber gave unjammable, crystal-clear control, but it was physically fragile. One sharp dodge, and it betrayed its own launch point. For Moscow's crews, this was the moment they had been waiting for. Radar hadn't done it. Jammers hadn't done it. Blind chance and a sudden evasive roll had done it instead. Russian units vectored to the corridor, trying to intercept the exposed control station before it slipped away. For the Ukrainian team, the mission shifted instantly. What began as a stealth insertion was now a running fight. The truck bounced through muddy tracks with cables still spooling loose inside. Every second counted. Stay, and they would be pinned. Move, and they had one last chance to push their drone into position. And with defenses tightening from three sides, they reached for the only move left, an untested maneuver that would decide if the strike survived at all. They called it the hot launch. A gamble born of pressure, it meant firing a drone straight from a moving truck while Russian search teams closed in. Normally, the launcher would be leveled, gyro stabilized, systems aligned. None of that was possible now. They skipped every safeguard and counted on the drone's onboard AI to recover midair. The release came with a dull, compressed gas thump. The airframe jolted free, tumbled through turbulence, then snapped into a violent roll as it cleared the tree line. For a few moments, it looked lost, but stabilization software corrected faster than human reflex, issuing adjustments hundreds of times per second until the craft leveled out. Within minutes, the feed steadied, indicators flickered green, and the mission was alive again. Inside the truck, tension barely lifted. Every rut in the forest track shook the spool of fiber unwinding behind them. Too much slack and it tangled. Too much strain and it snapped. The driver balanced speed against control, accelerating hard to get away, braking enough to keep the cable intact. One touch too sharp in either direction and the link would fail. On screens, operators watched two fronts at once. The drone's smooth advance above, and warning signals from the struggling tether below. Ahead, the Reeboth skimmed valleys in near silence. The fog remained a fragile shield, muting its heat profile against overhead sensors. But advantage never lasts. At higher altitude, Russian crews pushed the Orlan 10 reconnaissance drone back into the sector. Its thermal sweep finally saw what mattered, the fuel pipeline glowing against cold surroundings. Data moved quickly into Russian command networks, and orders spread to cut off that corridor before the strike arrived. The mission turned into a straight race. Russian units tightened the perimeter, shifting defenses toward the choke point that fed southern supply lines. In parallel, the drone pushed lower, faster, relying only on speed and AA reflexes. Concealment was gone. The margin now was measured in seconds. Around 12:25 to 12:30 a.m., the duel ended. The drone sensors fixed on target, autopilot guiding its nose, and the 2-pound-shaped charge triggered. The blast pierced the pipeline's wall, releasing stored pressure in an eruption of light. A sheet of fire tore upward, flames burning fuel into rolling rivers across the forest floor. The night sky flared white, treetops lit like day, visible far beyond the sector. The damage was not just visual. Flames consumed sections as long as 200 feet, metal ruptured further down the corridor, and fuel poured uncontrolled to the ground. Estimates tallied quickly, about $50 million in repair costs, and roughly $250 million lost in fuel, before counting the immediate supply shock across Moscow's southern front. What the defenders thought was a noisy diversion had cut straight into one of their most valuable arteries. In the cabin of the retreating truck, shock mixed with grim satisfaction. The operators had gambled on an untested launch, fought their own machine's limitations, and still forced the strike home. For them, survival mattered most. But tactically, the message was bigger. A handful of cheap decoys, supported by 2 specialized drones, had just undone a $3 billion asset. By the time Russian tracking caught up, the fire was already spreading. That scene set up the real lesson of the night. The outcome was not written by the volume of firepower, but by a simple rule. What you see in modern war is almost never the real threat. This was misdirection at scale. Expendable drones drew fire, clearing a corridor for one precision strike that mattered. The decoys weren't built to last. They existed to drain focus and ammunition until defenses snapped open. That exchange flipped value on its head. A modest airframe costing little delivered damage to $1 billion fuel artery into Moscow. That's the tactical takeaway. Low-cost, high-wit strikes can choke critical infrastructure, even against layered defenses. If this breakdown matters to you, like and subscribe. Drop an operation name in the comments. What would you call this mission? Stay with me for more clear, sober takes on how technology changes war.